I'd like to talk about a local case here on Long Island of a boy who was bullied over his gender choice. I'd like to look at it from the point of view of some of the implications it opens up for us in terms of how we look at individuals and how we affirm the dignity of the human person. This particular case involves a 15-year-old boy, and he faced abuse over his sexuality and his gender identity. He was a former student in the Smithtown School District on Long Island, and his mother has now filed a federal lawsuit both against the school district and 7 of its employees. So when that happens, we have to have some caution in terms of this is a lawsuit. It involves allegations. We don't assume necessarily that all of these allegations are truthful. They have to be adjudicated in a court. There has to be this back and forth of testimony and cross-examination. So we approach it with caution, but it's instructive in terms of how we view people and how we provide options for them in our educational system. The student's name is Michael Coppola, and the allegation is that he was bullied from 4th grade through 9th grade, so for a good number of years. And he endured physical abuse, even death threats, and homophobic taunts. Now, how did this affect Michael? According to the allegations, Michael suffered from depression, as you can well imagine, going through a lot of abuse and insults. His grades, which were initially good, declined. And he also, as a result of this, has developed an eating disorder. And of course, we might say, well, the eating disorder, did it come from that? The depression, it could be a number of other factors. But certainly, thinking of this type of treatment, if the allegations are true, it certainly could be an important factor in developing those symptoms. His mother, Diane Coppola, said that she brought the abuse to the attention of school officials. So it wasn't that she just ignored it. She let the school officials know what was going on. And this was over a period of 6 years. So there were a number of times when she made her feelings known and the situation known and what was happening to her son Michael. Her allegation is that she was met with indifference. And the indifference came from the teachers. It came from the administrators. And she felt that they did not protect Michael enough. Now, again, this is an allegation. We have to say, well, what exactly did the teachers do? Did they take any steps? Were the steps maybe not sufficient to protect Michael? But what did they do? So we'd have to hear from them, too, in terms of steps that they took to protect Michael. The lawsuit that was filed seeks unspecified damages for unlawful discrimination, for negligence, and for violation of the state's human rights and civil rights laws. So the lawsuit would be quite extensive in terms of those 3 fields for the allegations. Michael uses he and him pronouns and identifies as a male. The abuse has affected him physically. That is the claim, that he's had physical ramifications from the abuse. He is a stage performer, so he's somebody who is used to performing in front of others and enjoys it. He now attends a private school, but that private school is 90 minutes from his home. So that, of course, is a difficult commute for someone who's in the 9th grade. And before he started fourth grade, according to the lawsuit, the mother and father, to be preventative, met with the school administrators at Mount Pleasant Elementary School. Again, hear that name, Mount Pleasant, and this doesn't seem to be a pleasant experience at all for Michael. So they met with the school administration, which was a smart move on their part to warn them about this. And they asked, one of their asks was that there be no boy-girl lines used by teachers. Because although he identifies as a boy, Michael, he certainly has some of the characteristics of a girl, and that could be confusing, being on the boy-girl line. What do you do? I certainly feel like a boy, but maybe I look in some ways more like a girl, and I don't want to be singled out for this boy-girl situation. I want it to be kind of quiet, which understandable. He thought, well, and the parents agreed, he could be embarrassed if he publicly identified with a gender that other students could perceive as not conforming to his appearance. So you're going to have this conflict. You have your own gender that you feel comfortable with. I feel comfortable as a male. I like to use the pronouns he and him. That's who I am as a male. That's what I feel. That's my inclination. I've discovered this about myself. But physically, in terms of appearance, in some ways, I might resemble more a female. So again, this could be an issue, certainly. And it could lead to embarrassment. An embarrassment in front of your peers, that's not certainly a good thing. So on his first day of school at Mount Pleasant, it turned out not to be too pleasant because Michael's teacher separated the class into separate lines for boys and girls. Well, the students laughed at Michael when he joined the girls' line. I guess he had the male name Michael. Maybe he looked like a girl. He said, well, what should I do? Well, maybe I'll go with the girls' line instead of the boys' line. Perhaps any line he chose would have encountered the same laughter, and made him feel embarrassed. So here he is on his very first day in a new school, not starting off, obviously, on the best note. And the administrators had been warned. Now, did they get that warning back down to the teacher? And again, teacher, first day of school, dealing with a chaotic situation, all these students, trying to get to know them. Again, you don't know all of the circumstances. And again, this is just the one side. We'd have to look at the other side, obviously. In 2018, the Coppolas filed their first formal complaint under the state's Dignity for All Students Act. And why did they file that complaint? Well, one of the students in the school threatened to strangle Michael. So, not a good thing. And again, these are kids. Was the threat a serious threat? What are the circumstances of the threat? What did the teachers do? Did they intervene? All of those things. But in any case, the state has this law, Dignity for All Students Act, which sounds beautiful, right? So they filed a complaint underneath that. The parents filed 7 subsequent complaints with regard to the same act as the bullying intensified. So I guess they thought maybe the filing of these complaints would bring this to a public attention and would lead to less complaints, less incidents, less bullying. However, that did not happen. The bullying actually intensified. Students actually pushed and shoved Michael, according to the complaint. And again, the pushing and shoving, did it happen when the teachers were involved with other students? Was it kind of done away from the teachers so they didn't, and the assistant teachers so they didn't see it? Again, we don't know all of the factors that are involved in this. They also tampered with his food. So I guess the food in the cafeteria, or the food he brought from home, or whatever food, and they would put things in the food, and this would make it difficult. I could see why it could lead to maybe problems eating that Michael had later on. They directed also homophobic profanities at him. And again, was this out of the hearing of the teachers? A lot goes on in schools. There's a lot of action. Maybe the teachers were unaware of that. We don't know. They also started an I Hate Michael club. Again, you'd say, well, how public was the club? Certainly, I'm sure it was not a club that met on school grounds with a designated moderator, But certainly it was something that Michael perceived, at least, that there was this hatred coming from this group. Also, an orchestra teacher shamed him for wearing heel shoes to a violin concert. So that was his choice to wear these, and the teacher, I guess, made some sort of remark. And again, maybe the teacher was just trying to be humorous, an icebreaker, whatever. We don't know all the circumstances of that, but he felt shame from that remark. And a music teacher discouraged him from trying out for a traditionally female role in a school play, so as a stage performer. And he wanted to try out for a role that was traditionally a female role, and he was discouraged from doing that. Michael, as a result of the bullying, according to the allegations, he skipped field days, I guess, which would have been difficult situations for him with an athletic competition. He skipped a year-end dance, and also even his 8th grade graduation, because he felt maybe some remarks would have been made about him during that graduation. And he also missed much time in class because of the mental anguish of the abuse. I guess it was difficult for him to go to school and face school, saying, what's going to happen to me at school? And so this was an ongoing struggle, obviously, for Michael. Obviously, the intent of the lawsuit is to establish the principle, which is a fairly obvious principle, that when a student is being abused, the school has a duty, has an obligation to protect that student. And I think that's something that we would all agree, no matter where the abuse is coming from or what the situation of the abuse is, we want to protect our children, we want to keep them safe. And that's obviously one of the main obligations that a school has towards their students. Now, what are some of the considerations in terms of this situation? Well, first, as I stated earlier, it's a lawsuit, so you have to see how this develops, you have to see what the other side says, you have to have a dialogue back and forth. What were some of the circumstances involved? What did the teachers try to do? What did the administrators try to do? Certainly, they have a right, and they will get the opportunity to present their side of the story too, so that more clarity, more light is brought to the situation. There certainly is, in the situation too, where a student is transgender, a need for great sensitivity, and that is difficult. For many, this would be a new situation. A lot of teachers, a lot of administrators are not used to this. It seems to be more common now than it was years ago, and there could be many factors for that. But still, it's something that is unusual. And so how do you deal with it? How do you make it a positive situation for the other students, and certainly for Michael, for the transgender student? And so something that we have to look at, be careful about, certainly, and want to do everything we can to be supportive of the students and supportive of the transgender student as well. I think key to this is the importance of listening. Listening to the parents and listening to the student. Having that dialogue with the parents. And the parents approach the school, have that initial dialogue, which in some respects didn't seem to go all that well because of that experience on the first day of school that Michael had. But certainly is a key here. Sitting down with the parents, sitting down with the student, getting an understanding of the situation, and trying to say, what would be the most comfortable way to handle different situations that come up so that we don't embarrass Michael. The key principle, of course, is the dignity of the student, doing everything we can, and certainly that would be the principle behind every teacher, behind every administrator. We want to preserve the dignity of that student so the student reaches their full potential as a human being. Do everything we can to promote that, to help that student, and to dialogue with the other students to make sure that that happens. We have to also look at the question, well then, what are the consequences for the student who bullies? If bullying is going on, how do we, first of all, intervene to stop it? And what are our procedures in terms of dialoguing with that student's parents and that student so that the bullying stops? Why does that student bully? And all of those considerations would be very important. And you have to be very specific. What did the student do? What did the student say? And there certainly should be consequences for that. And consequences in a way that doesn't embarrass the student, the transgender student in this case, who has been bullied. What are the consequences for a teacher who embarrasses a student? Obviously, here we have a situation where two teachers in the school district embarrassed the student, upset the student. Well, what are the consequences? Certainly a dialogue. Maybe they were unaware that they had done that. Maybe it was with good intentions. Maybe they wanted to save Michael from embarrassment. So again, it would be a need for dialogue there and say, well, these were the consequences. This is how Michael felt. What can we do to preserve Michael's dignity, to make sure that this doesn't happen again, and to help Michael cope with this, to offer him the support that he needs to deal with this. And really, when you think about it, this is not a transgender issue as such, because this should be a universal attitude. It's not a question of the student's sexuality. Each student should be listened to, respected, honored, and validated. And that's the way we should approach it. We don't want to harp on the student's sexuality. We want to harp on the fact that we want to do everything to preserve their dignity. And if a remark is made, or a student is pushed, or their food is messed with, whatever the particular situation is, it's wrong no matter if they are homosexual, heterosexual, transgender. All of this is really not the issue. The issue is, how do we promote the dignity of that student? Do we have a tendency to, a question we have to pose, do we have a tendency to be more skeptical of what the parents and students of the transsexual student is asking us to do because she or he is different? So again, this could be an underlying issue. Well, maybe the parents are making too much of it. Maybe they're making too much of their child's sexuality. Maybe the student is confused about their sexuality, and maybe they're just going through a phase. And so we can maybe downplay it a little bit and not take it as seriously as we should. And in some cases, that might be an underlying reality. There's a fluidity here with regard to a person's sexuality, and they're developing it at this stage in their lives. But it's important that we listen to them where they're at that point. Next year might be a different reality. Years down the road, we don't know. But it's important to respect them and to promote respect among other students for them at this time in their life. And so our own underlying skepticism could come into play here. And that's a caution. We have to be careful of that and say, well, I'm not going to make a big deal of it. It might be different tomorrow. Well, we have to listen to where the child is at today. And that's extremely important, even though it might change. And that's fine. Do we ourselves have an underlying prejudice on the issue of the transsexual student? Because underneath we doubt, dismiss, and question transsexuality. Maybe we say, oh, there's no such thing as transsexuality. It's just made up. It's a myth. It doesn't really exist. Why are they making such a big deal out of it? I'm just going to treat them, as his biological sex. So biologically, Michael was a girl. I'm going to just treat him as a girl because, he's saying he's a boy, but I see him as a girl. I'm going to treat him as a girl, and that's the way it's going to be. Because we don't believe in the concept of transsexuality. We think it's made up. We think it's artificial. We think it's crazy. We don't have anything to do with it. We think maybe it's one of those things that those woke people came up with, those crazy people who just come up with these ridiculous ideas. And there's no such thing as transsexuality. So we have to be aware that could be a prejudice on our part. Down deep, we might feel that way. And that's fine. People are certainly entitled to their own beliefs about things like this. But when it gets to the point where we're not listening to parents, we're not listening to students, and we're not affirming the student where the student is at, it can become certainly a problem in terms of our attitude towards them. So the underlying principle, I think, is important, and that is the dignity of the student, listening to the student, listening to their parents, working cooperatively with them, and trying to create the best atmosphere we can in our classrooms, in our schools overall. And this certainly is a challenge. It's not an easy thing because you're dealing with so many factors. It's a very complicated situation. But I think this particular case might be instructive for us to reflect on and say, can we do a better job of promoting the dignity of the student?